The courtroom felt smaller than it should have, the air thick with tension and expensive cologne. My Uncle Marcus slammed a stack of papers onto the polished table, his face red with theatrical outrage. The sound echoed off the walls like a gunshot. "You signed this, Natalie. Your consent was implied." His voice boomed across the room, designed to intimidate, to make me seem small and confused. My throat tightened. I didn't sign anything. I never gave consent to sell my father's company. The judge glanced between us, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp, calculating. My lawyer leaned close and whispered against my ear, "Play it cool, don't react yet." I kept my face blank, swallowing the anger rising in my chest. Across the aisle, movement caught my attention. The door opened and closed quietly. Someone new entered, someone Marcus hadn't been expecting based on how his shoulders tensed. The woman beside me, Amara Cole, smiled faintly, just a small curve of her lips barely visible, but I saw it. I stood slowly, every eye in the courtroom turning toward me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "the buyer is with me." The room erupted into chaos. My name is Natalie Pierce, and 6 years ago, my father built Pierce Manufacturing from nothing but a garage, a dream, and hands that never stopped working. He made industrial parts, small components that went into bigger machines. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that employed 40 families in our town. When cancer took him, I was only 26 years old. Too young to lose a parent, too unprepared to inherit a company. He left me 51% of the shares and a promise I'd whispered at his bedside. I would protect his legacy no matter what. My Uncle Marcus, Dad's younger brother, offered to help me navigate the business side. "You handle the sentimental part," he'd said at the funeral, his hand on my shoulder. "I'll handle the real business. That's what brothers do for each other and what uncles do for their nieces." It sounded generous then. It sounded like family looking out for family. I was grieving, overwhelmed, and desperately wanted to believe someone cared. That was my first mistake, trusting him completely, but I was about to make it right. 3 months after Dad's funeral, I walked into the office building that still smelled like his aftershave in certain corners. I headed toward the boardroom for our weekly meeting, but the door was closed. Through the glass wall, I could see my uncle, our CFO, and 2 men in expensive suits I'd never seen before. They were leaning over documents, pointing, discussing something that looked serious. When I pushed the door open, all conversation stopped. 4 faces turned toward me with identical expressions of annoyance. Marcus forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Natalie, this is a private meeting, family business only." I stood there, confused, my hand still on the door handle. "I am family. I own 51% of this company." His smile tightened into something uglier. He exchanged glances with the CFO, then looked back at me. His next words were quiet, almost too low for the others to hear, but I caught every syllable. "You're just the figurehead, sweetheart. Let the adults work." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stepped back, heat flooding my face. The men in suits wouldn't meet my eyes. I left without another word, but something shifted inside me that day. 2 weeks later, I was working from home when an email notification chimed on my laptop. It was from our company's bank, with a subject line that made my stomach drop. "Confirmation of partial asset transfer." My hands shook as I opened the attachment. There, on official company letterhead, was a document authorizing the transfer of manufacturing equipment worth over $200,000 to a subsidiary I'd never heard of. At the bottom, clear as day, was my signature. Except I'd never signed it. I printed the document immediately, then pulled out old papers I'd actually signed for comparison. The signature was perfect, identical down to the loop in my T and the slight upward flourish at the end. Someone had practiced. Someone had studied my signature until they could forge it flawlessly. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, just staring at that signature. My father's face kept appearing in my mind, the way he'd looked at me in the hospital. "Promise me you'll fight for what's right," he'd said. I was about to start fighting. The next morning, I confronted Marcus in his office. I slapped the printed document onto his desk, my hands trembling with rage. I never signed this. This is fraud. He barely glanced at it. Then he laughed, actually laughed like I'd told a funny joke. Natalie, sweetheart, you signed it at Dad's memorial service. There were papers everywhere. You were emotional, not really paying attention. He waved his hand dismissively. Completely understandable. The audacity of his lie made my breath catch. I was grieving, not signing business documents. You're remembering wrong. His tone turned condescending, the way you'd speak to a confused child. The stress has been hard on you. Everyone understands. He stood up, walked past me, and left his own office, whistling. Actually whistling. As he passed the reception area, I heard him tell his assistant, "She's just overwhelmed. Poor thing." And just like that, he rewrote reality with a few casual words. Everyone would believe the grieving daughter was confused, emotional, unreliable. It was brilliant and disgusting. A week after that confrontation, I tried to access our corporate bank account to review recent transactions. The online portal rejected my password. I reset it twice. Still nothing. I called the bank directly. The manager, Mr. Phillips, sounded apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Ms. Pierce, but your authorization was revoked last Tuesday. We received instruction from the acting CEO." "Acting CEO?" My voice came out strangled. "What are you talking about?" "Mr. Marcus Pierce. He submitted board documentation showing a temporary transfer of executive authority while you complete your education." He paused. "Is there a problem?" I hung up without answering and immediately pulled up our company's official registration documents online. There, filed 3 weeks ago, was a change of leadership form. Acting CEO, Marcus Pierce. Reason, primary shareholder pursuing advanced business education, temporary delegation of authority. It was all lies, but it was official, notarized, legal lies. My father's dream, the company he'd built with bleeding hands and sleepless nights, was being stolen in broad daylight with paperwork and signatures. And everyone thought I'd agreed to it. I went to see Mr. Lang, our family's lawyer for 20 years. He'd known my father since the beginning, had helped incorporate the business. If anyone would help me, it would be him. He listened to my story while flipping through documents I'd brought. His office smelled like old books and coffee. When I finished talking, he sighed heavily, removing his reading glasses. "Natalie, this is complicated. According to these papers, you ceded operational control until age 30. There's a clause here that allows for temporary executive reassignment if the primary shareholder is deemed inexperienced in operational management." "Show me that clause in the original incorporation papers," I demanded. He flipped back several pages, then forward again. His finger traced lines of text. When he looked up, his expression told me everything. "This appears to have been added in an amendment filed 6 months ago." "Added later," I whispered, "after my father died, after I inherited. Is that even legal?" Mr. Lang hesitated too long before answering. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. That's when I knew he was either involved or too scared to help me. Either way, I was alone. I walked out of his office knowing the truth. Marcus had help, professional help, and they'd covered their tracks carefully. I stopped fighting publicly after that. I stopped showing up to board meetings where I wasn't wanted. I stopped asking questions that no one would answer honestly. Everyone assumed I'd given up, that I was just another young woman who couldn't handle the business world. I let them think that. Every Sunday, I visited my father's grave. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful, the opposite of everything happening in my life. I'd sit on the grass beside his headstone and whisper updates like he could hear me. "Dad, I haven't given up. I'm just getting smarter." During the day, I worked my regular job as a graphic designer. But at night, I enrolled in online courses about corporate law, forensic accounting, and business fraud. I read everything I could find about hostile takeovers and family business disputes. I learned the language of the enemy. I studied their tactics, their loopholes, their favorite weapons. Knowledge became my armor. And under the radar, completely invisible to Marcus and his lawyers, I started building my case piece by piece. 4 months into my silent war, I received an unexpected email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You need to know this." The sender identified himself as Leo, a former intern who'd worked in Pierce Manufacturing's accounting department the previous summer. His message was brief, but explosive. "Ms. Pierce, I know what your uncle is doing. He's setting up a sale of the entire company behind your back. I have proof. Can we meet?" Attached were 3 files, internal memos discussing Project Gray, meeting invites with participants blacked out except for Marcus's name, budget allocations for legal consultations labeled acquisition preparation. My hands shook as I read through each document. They were real, pulled from internal company servers. The sale wasn't just theoretical or maybe happening someday. It was nearly finalized, scheduled to close in less than 3 months. I replied to Leo immediately, agreeing to meet at a coffee shop across town where no one from the company would recognize us. He responded within minutes with a time and location. For the first time in months, I felt something besides anger. I felt hope. Leo turned out to be a nervous 24-year-old with thick glasses and a laptop covered in coding stickers. We met at the back corner of a loud coffee shop where conversation couldn't be overheard. He pulled up files on his laptop, speaking quickly. "The buyer's name is Everline Holdings. I dug into them after I saw the memos. They're a shell company, registered 6 months ago." "Shell company?" I leaned closer to see his screen. "Yeah, basically a fake business used to hide real ownership. Everline has no website, no public staff directory, no physical office address listed. Just a registered agent in Delaware and an offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands." My stomach twisted. Who actually owns it? "That's the thing, I can't find out. The ownership is buried under layers of LLCs and trusts. But here's what I do know." He turned his laptop toward me, showing a scanned signature on a purchase agreement. "Your uncle signed this preliminary sale agreement 3 weeks ago. The buyer offered $12 million for full acquisition." $12 million. For a company my father had built from nothing, that was worth at least $20 million by conservative estimates. Marcus was selling it cheap, probably getting a kickback or side deal we couldn't see yet. "Whoever owns Everline," Leo said quietly, "your uncle trusts them completely." 2 weeks after meeting Leo, Marcus called a family meeting at the company's conference room. He sent a formal invitation to my email, his first direct communication with me in months. The subject line read, "Important company announcement." I arrived early and took a seat at the far end of the long table. Slowly, the room filled. My cousins, department heads, longtime employees who'd worked alongside my father. Everyone looked curious, some excited. Marcus entered last, wearing his most expensive suit. He stood at the head of the table, smiling broadly. "Thank you all for coming. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Pierce Manufacturing has received an extraordinary acquisition offer. After careful consideration and consultation with stakeholders, I've decided to accept. This will ensure the company's future and provide security for all employees." He paused for effect, then looked directly at me. "I want to especially thank Natalie for agreeing to this decision. I know it wasn't easy, but she understands it's what's best for everyone." The room erupted in applause. People smiled at me, nodding with approval. My cousin Angela reached over and squeezed my hand. I sat there, smiling through the fury burning in my chest. "Of course, Uncle Marcus," I said sweetly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I trust your judgment completely." Inside, I was already planning his complete destruction. The sale went through exactly on schedule. One morning, I drove past the company building and stopped my car in shock. The sign that had read Pierce Manufacturing, S 1995, for my entire life was gone. In its place, a bland corporate logo I didn't recognize. My father's name, his legacy, erased overnight. Marcus hosted a press conference that afternoon. I watched it online from my apartment, each word like a knife. He stood in front of cameras, taking credit for saving the business, for making tough decisions, for ensuring the company's survival in changing economic times. Not once did he mention my father. Not once did he acknowledge who'd actually built Pierce Manufacturing from a garage workshop into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. But that same day, while Marcus celebrated with champagne and self-congratulation, I sat at my kitchen table with Leo and opened a new business bank account. The name on the account, Pierce Trust Holdings, LLC. The paperwork listed me as sole owner and operator, purpose of business, corporate acquisitions and asset management. If Marcus thought the game was over, he was about to learn it had just begun. Leo had done more than just gather evidence. He'd introduced me to someone, a lawyer named Amara Cole who specialized in corporate fraud cases. She was 32, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for winning cases everyone else considered unwinnable. Our first meeting happened in her small office in the financial district. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "If you want to win, you don't fight loud. You fight smart. Emotional appeals won't work here. Evidence will." She opened a folder. "I'll need every document you have, every email, every signature, every timeline. We're going to reconstruct exactly what happened and prove it in court." Over the next 8 weeks, Amara and her team worked methodically. We compared signatures. We analyzed document metadata. We tracked money transfers. We interviewed former employees off the record. Slowly, painstakingly, we built a case that was absolutely airtight. The day Amara called to tell me we had enough evidence to file suit, I sat in my car and cried. Not from sadness, but from relief so intense it physically hurt. Amara's forensic document analyst found something extraordinary buried in the digital files. Every document Marcus had submitted to various institutions, banks, courts, and regulatory agencies contained metadata. Hidden information about when files were created, modified, and saved. The timestamps told a devastating story. Documents I'd allegedly signed in the weeks after my father's death showed modification dates months later. My signature on the transfer agreement had been added to a blank template 2 months after I supposedly signed it. Every forgery left a digital fingerprint. "This is fraud," Amara said, spreading the analysis across her conference table. "Provable, prosecutable fraud. He edited these documents after the fact and backdated them." We now had leverage. More than that, we had proof that would hold up under the most intense legal scrutiny. But Amara's next suggestion surprised me. "We don't file yet. First, we let him get comfortable, let him think he's untouchable." I trusted her completely, so I waited. And while I waited, Marcus dug his hole even deeper. Marcus's arrogance grew exponentially after the sale. He started giving interviews to business journals and local news stations. In every interview, he positioned himself as the savior who'd rescued his brother's failing company. "My niece is a sweet girl," he told one reporter, his condescending tone making me want to throw something at my computer screen. "But she's sentimental, not business-minded. She couldn't understand the bigger picture. Sometimes family has to make hard choices." Another interview. "Natalie simply didn't have the education or experience for this level of corporate management. I did what any responsible family member would do." Each interview, each dismissive comment, each public humiliation was recorded and saved. Amara stored every clip, every quote, every moment of his arrogance. "He's building our case for us," she said with satisfaction. Meanwhile, she quietly prepared something bigger. Court documents, meticulously organized. Evidence files, indexed and cross-referenced. Witness statements from employees who'd seen Marcus forge signatures or pressure people into silence. And finally, the summons. Official, legal, unavoidable. Pierce versus Pierce. Shareholder fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, forged documents, and conspiracy to commit theft of corporate assets. The envelope arrived at Marcus's office on a Tuesday morning. I wasn't there to see his face, but I heard about it later. Apparently, he went pale. While Marcus flaunted his victory in public, Amara worked on something he never saw coming. She traced Everline Holdings backward through its maze of shell companies and offshore accounts. The ownership structure was deliberately complicated, designed to hide the real buyer. But Amara specialized in following money trails, and she was very, very good at her job. What she discovered was perfect. The original LLC that had created Everline Holdings had been dissolved 6 weeks after the company was registered. A legal loophole, probably an oversight by whoever set it up. That dissolution meant ownership technically reverted to a neutral state. Amara made a quiet offer through her own law firm, acting as a purchasing agent for an unnamed client. She bought controlling interest in Everline Holdings for exactly $1 and legal assumption of any outstanding obligations, which meant she now owned the company that owned Pierce Manufacturing. Which meant I own my father's company again. Marcus had no idea. The paperwork was filed in multiple jurisdictions, buried under legal language he'd never bother to read. As far as he knew, Everline Holdings was still the independent buyer he'd negotiated with. He wouldn't learn the truth until we wanted him to, and we wanted him to learn it in the most devastating way possible. The envelope arrived at Marcus's office on a Thursday afternoon via registered mail requiring signature. Inside was a court summons, official and unavoidable. Pierce versus Pierce. The lawsuit detailed shareholder fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, forgery, and conspiracy. 23 pages of allegations, each one backed by documented evidence. I wasn't there when he opened it, but his assistant told Leo about it later. Apparently, Marcus's face went from confusion to red fury in seconds. He screamed for his lawyer, made a dozen phone calls, then got in his car. He showed up at my apartment 30 minutes later, pounding on my door. I'd been expecting this, so I stayed calm and let him in. He stormed into my living room, waving the summons. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His face was purple, veins bulging in his neck. "You think you can outsmart me? You think you can drag me into court with these ridiculous accusations?" I sat down on my couch, deliberately calm. "They're not accusations, Uncle Marcus. They're documented facts. You have nothing. You're just a bitter girl who couldn't handle losing Daddy's company." "Actually," I said quietly, "I already won, you just don't know it yet." He stared at me, trying to understand what I meant, but I didn't explain. I just smiled and waited for him to leave. The lawsuit tore our family apart within days. My cousins called me, furious, accusing me of attacking family. They'd all been receiving regular payments from Marcus, I learned later. Allowances, consulting fees, gifts. Money that had actually come from Pierce Manufacturing's accounts. They had a financial interest in keeping Marcus in power, so they turned on me viciously. My cousin Angela left me a voicemail calling me ungrateful and selfish. My uncle's wife sent me a text saying I was destroying the family over nothing. Former family friends stopped returning my calls. I let them scream. I let them threat. I even let them publicly disown me at a family gathering I wasn't invited to but heard about anyway. Because soon, very soon, the truth would make everything clear. And their anger would shift targets once they realized Marcus had been stealing from them too. Amara advised me to stay silent during this period. "Let them be loud," she said. "We'll be effective." So I endured the anger and isolation, knowing it was temporary. Justice doesn't require an audience, just evidence. The pretrial hearing happened in a smaller courtroom than I'd expected. Marcus arrived with 2 lawyers, both expensive and confident. They wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Amara came alone, except for one paralegal, carrying 3 boxes of evidence. The judge reviewed preliminary documents while we waited. Then the questioning began. Marcus's lawyers argued the lawsuit was frivolous, emotional, a grieving daughter who couldn't accept business realities. Then Amara stood up and methodically destroyed every argument. She presented digital forensics showing document modifications after supposed signing dates. She showed email chains where Marcus discussed handling me. She played audio recordings from employees who'd witnessed him forging my signature. Marcus's lead lawyer, a man who'd started the day smirking, grew progressively quieter. He kept glancing at papers, then at Marcus, confusion and anger building. The opposing lawyer hadn't been told the full truth by his own client. Now he was discovering it in court, and his professional reputation was on the line. When Amara finished, the judge removed her glasses. "We'll proceed to trial. This evidence certainly merits full examination." Marcus glared at me across the courtroom, finally realizing too late that every lie he'd told was now on public record. Someone leaked the lawsuit details to the press. I never found out who, though I suspected one of the paralegals who'd seen our evidence and felt morally obligated to let the public know. The headline appeared in the business section of our city's newspaper. "Heiress accuses uncle of selling family business using forged signature." By evening, the story had spread. Local news picked it up. Business blogs wrote analysis pieces. People who'd worked for my father started calling reporters with their own stories about Marcus's behavior. Marcus's phone must have been ringing constantly. Several of his investors pulled out of other projects. Business partners started distancing themselves. His carefully built reputation was crumbling in real time. Meanwhile, Amara instructed me to remain completely silent. No interviews, no social media posts, no public comments. Let the evidence speak. So I stayed quiet while the media storm raged. I went to work, came home, visited my father's grave, and waited for the trial. The silence drove Marcus crazy. He called me repeatedly, left angry voicemails, tried to contact me through relatives. He wanted to know what I was planning, what I'd do next. I didn't respond to any of it. 1 week before the trial, Marcus tried a desperation move. He called and asked to meet privately, claiming he wanted to talk like family. Against my better judgment, but with Amara's approval and a recording device in my purse, I agreed. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, where neither of us was likely to be recognized. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his face exhausted. He'd probably been sleeping poorly, worried about the trial. He sat down across from me and immediately slid an envelope across the table. "Open it." Inside was a check for $500,000. My hands trembled slightly as I looked at the amount. "Take it and walk away," Marcus said quietly. "Drop the lawsuit. We'll say it was all a misunderstanding. You keep the money, I keep the company, everyone moves on." I stared at that check for a long moment. $500,000, more money than I'd ever seen at once. Then I pushed it back across the table. "Keep it," I said softly. "You're going to need it for legal fees and penalties." His face hardened into something ugly. I stood up and walked out, leaving him sitting there with his failed bribe. The final hearing fell on a Tuesday in late October. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, former employees, and curious observers who'd followed the case in the news. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his lawyers, who looked significantly less confident than during the pretrial. He kept glancing at the door, checking his watch, waiting for something. The buyer's representative, I realized. He expected someone from Everline Holdings to testify on his behalf, to confirm the sale was legitimate. The judge called the court to order. "We're here for the matter of Pierce versus Pierce. Are both parties present?" "Yes, Your Honor," Amara said, standing. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus's lawyer replied, though he sounded uncertain. "I understand the buyer's company is supposed to provide testimony today. Are they present?" That's when the courtroom door opened. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Every head turned to watch as someone walked down the center aisle toward the front. Amara Cole adjusted her briefcase and moved to sit in the chair directly beside me. The courtroom went completely silent. Marcus's face drained of all color. His lawyer turned to him, confused, whispering urgent questions. The judge looked between us, clearly puzzled. "Ms. Cole, you're the plaintiff's attorney." "Yes, Your Honor. I'm also the representative of Everline Holdings." Amara stood slowly and addressed the court. Her voice was calm, professional, devastating. Your Honor, I'd like to submit documents proving that Everline Holdings, the company Mr. Marcus Pierce sold Pierce Manufacturing to, is now owned by my law firm acting as trustee for Ms. Natalie Pierce. She walked forward and handed the judge a folder. These documents show the chain of ownership transfer, all properly filed and notarized. When the original holding company was dissolved, ownership became available. We purchased controlling interest 6 weeks ago. The judge flipped through papers, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at Marcus. Mr. Pierce, are you saying you sold your niece's company to your niece without knowing it? Marcus couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Not just that, Your Honor, Amara continued. He sold it illegally, using forged documents to claim authorization he never had. Ms. Pierce owns 51% of Pierce Manufacturing and never consented to any sale. The transaction was fraudulent from the beginning. The judge studied Marcus for a long moment. This is extraordinary. Knowingly or not, you've essentially stolen a company and sold it back to its rightful owner while committing multiple felonies in the process. It was over. Everything Marcus had built, every lie he'd told, every manipulation, collapsed in a single moment. The verdict came swiftly after Amara's revelation. The judge found Marcus guilty of fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to commit theft. Each charge carried penalties, fines, and potential criminal prosecution. He lost everything: his position, his reputation, his freedom to operate in business. The court ordered him to return all money he'd taken from the company, pay my legal fees, and face potential criminal charges pending the district attorney's review. The house he'd bought with company funds was seized. The car, the country club membership, the investment accounts he'd hidden, all of it traced and frozen. As we left the courthouse, Marcus passed me in the hallway. His lawyer was on the phone, probably already talking about appeals and damage control. Marcus stopped and looked at me, his expression something between fury and grudging respect. "You're just like your father," he muttered. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Uncle Marcus. That's the kindest thing anyone's said to me in a long time." He walked away, shoulders slumped, a man who'd lost everything because he'd underestimated the one person he should have feared. I watched him go, feeling not triumph but something quieter. Relief, justice, peace. A year later, I stood in front of Pierce Manufacturing as workers replaced the building sign. The old logo was coming down, the original one going back up. Pierce Manufacturing, Est 1995. My father's name, restored where it belonged. I walked through the production floor that afternoon, greeting familiar faces. People who'd worked alongside my father smiled and waved. The air smelled like metal and machine oil and possibility. Several employees stopped me to say thank you. "Your dad would be proud," one older man said, his eyes wet. He'd worked for my father since the beginning. In my father's old office, now mine, I sat at the desk where he'd planned and dreamed and built something from nothing. His picture hung on the wall, young and smiling, full of hope. "We did it, Dad," I whispered to his photograph. "The company's safe, your legacy is safe." No gloating social media posts, no press conferences about my victory, no public revenge tour, just quiet satisfaction and the knowledge that justice, while slow, had arrived exactly when it needed to. I'd learned something important through all of this. The best revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's simply making sure the truth comes out and protecting what matters most. Outside my window, the Pierce Manufacturing sign gleamed in the afternoon sun, my father's name visible for miles. Home, legacy, justice. Everything back where it belonged.